I'd now like to welcome representatives from the Federal Chamber of Automotive Industries. For the Hansard record, can you please state your full names and capacities in which you appear today?
Tony Webber, Chief Executive of the Federal Chamber of Automotive Industries.
Tony McDonald, Director of Industry Operations, Federal Chamber of Automotive Industries.
Thank you. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses has been provided to you. I'd now like to invite you to make a short opening statement, and at the conclusion of your remarks, we will have... Thank you.
Thanks, Senator. The FCAI would like to publicly state its great sadness in regard to the demise of the iconic Holden brand and what that means for all Australians, including owners, employees and dealers. The franchising code plays an important role in management of new motor dealer network around Australia. Recent amendments developed in conjunction with the dealer representative bodies and the federal government have led to the inclusion of new sector-specific requirements. These amendments are very recent and thus the current regime is untested. The sector, like many others in the economy, is evolving and responding to changing consumer demands in products, services and purchasing channels. It is likely that the drive to provide consumers with choice, affordability and value will lead to innovation and avenues to the market. This is not unique to the automotive sector. It needs to be made clear to the committee that new vehicle dealerships are not franchises. There is no franchise fee paid on the way in, no goodwill due on the way out, and no royalties on sales as examples. The often quoted but seriously misleading statements about significant power imbalances in the sector are simply not true. Most dealerships are very significant commercial enterprises with significant financial, legal and business acumen to call upon in considering the acceptance of a new or renewed dealership agreement. FCAI would like to stress the positive aspects of the relationship between dealers and distributors. It is by far and away a more positive relationship than is portrayed by many. The relationship is symbiotic and supportive. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your opening statement. Senator McGrath, would you like to kick off with questions?
Senator McGrath just stepped out.
Okay, Senator Faruqi.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon. You've spoken about the demands changing, consumer choices changing. So I'm just wondering that in your view, is there enough government support in terms of R&D, in innovation in some of the areas where demand and consumer choices are changing or will change, for instance, electric vehicles, or is there enough support for the government to look into areas such as those?
Well, Senator, the industry is a very internationally based industry. We take product from right around the world, and in fact, since 2017, we no longer manufacture vehicles in this country. So there are many opportunities to pick up the best quality vehicles and technologies from around the world and bring to Australia. Australia does have an important role to play, and it has played that through its R&D centres. And there are a number of brands that have had significant R&D centres in this country, and they have certainly added to that international expertise. Whether we go forward with that in any great volume is very much dependent upon the incentives provided by governments, and governments around the world provide those incentives.
Yeah, but in your experience, is the Australian government providing those incentives or investing in supporting innovative research in the automotive industry? And should we?
Well, Australia has a very long and proud tradition in this sector, and the support provided by successive Australian governments has certainly aided the development of the industry over a long period of time. The question going forward is, given the framework and the level of assistance in Australia, is that competitive against other assistance packages provided in other parts of the world? And that will in part drive how much R&D work is done in this country. It's also got to do very heavily with the innovation system. And when I talk about the innovation system, I'm talking about the capacity to do research in the university sector, the capacity of the university sector to supply quality labour in terms of graduates through to the industry, and also the knowledge that remains within the industry that's been built up over time. So it's a complex issue, Senator.
Sure, but we need to invest in that. You would agree with that. If we want to build capacity, we would have to invest in building that capacity.
Without doubt. Without doubt.
In your submission, you've also said that franchisees are, and I quote from your submission, in the main far from small businesses and are not in a vulnerable position vis-a-vis the manufacturers. Now, this claim has been rejected by the AADA this morning, and there's others as well who we've heard from and who have provided submissions who have a different view to yours. So I guess my question to you is, what do you base your assessment on?
Well, many dealers in this country are significant businesses in their own right. They have either in-house or access to the best taxation, legal and business advice available. We're not talking about a classic franchising arrangement in which there are literally mums and dad businesses. Very few automotive dealers are in that category, like other areas of franchising in this country.
Do you think dealers are getting a fair deal with the compensation package that Holden GM has offered them?
Well, I haven't seen the package that has been provided to them, and nor would I expect to be, and I also don't have the financial acumen to actually make a decision about whether that package is appropriate or not, even if I did have the raw data.
Yeah,
in fact, Senator, I'm actually very surprised about how many people claim to have that capacity.
Have what capacity, sorry?
Their capacity to make an assessment whether the offer is an appropriate one or not.
Okay, thanks, Chair. That's all I have.
Senator McGrath, are you?
Yes, I'm back. Sorry, I had to take a
No, that's fine.
phone call. And I do apologise for stepping out of the room for 5 minutes. So I'm just
No
had
worries.
to deal
No,
with an issue.
that's completely fine.
So just so I could just go through some simple questions from my perspective, so I can sort of understand here. So your members, how would you classify your members?
Yeah, our members are the importers of motor vehicles and motorcycles into this country. In terms of motor vehicle sales, we're around about 99% per annum of total sales by our membership.
Okay. So when you say importers, is it like the manufacturers? So would that be, for example, is General Motors Holden one of your members?
General Motors Holden is our member. So just to make the distinction, Senator, it is many brands are bought in by a representative of their brand in Australia, and then other times other organisations have the distribution rights for vehicles in the country for the brand. And I can give you an example of that. Subaru, Citroen and Peugeot in this country are imported and distributed by Inchcape, which is a UK-based firm.
Okay, all right. So in your, so do you as an organisation, your members might, but do you as an organisation have any sort of working relationship then with the retailers of the new vehicles?
Well, we represent our members' interests, and we have regular dialogue with other industry bodies such as the AADA and the MTAA, which have been before you today. So we have discussions there, but we have very little connection directly to dealers.
Okay, so it's sort of industry body to industry body rather
Typically,
than,
yes.
than you to directly with the retailers. Okay. In your submission, you to this inquiry, you were quite strong in this one when I think about it, that the relationship between vehicle importers, so I suppose your members, and dealers is not what you would consider to be a franchise sort of relationship. Are you able to expand on that? I know you did touch upon it in your submission, but just be good for the evidence here today.
Sure. So the reason why automotive dealers are part of the franchising code is because they are written in rather than coming under the natural definition of a franchise. It is, Mr. McDonald, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's almost like a footnote to the franchising code. If you take the pure definition as set out by that code, we would not be picked up.
Okay. Could you actually, just for my benefit, could you expand upon that for me so I understand that a bit more fully? Sorry, please.
I think, Senator, in the franchise code, there's a number of tests that say this is what a franchise is. The arrangements in new motor vehicle distribution don't meet those tests, such as there's a fee payable on entry and purchase of the franchise, there's royalties payable on sale, and there may be goodwill or things like that. We don't have any of that in new motor vehicle dealerships. What happens is that we sell product to the dealer. That's it, full stop. They then sell and keep the money. We wholesale vehicles. But within the franchise code, I think it's section 5.4, there's a little footnote that says new motor vehicle dealerships will be treated as franchises for the purposes of this code, and that's why we're part of it. So where we've got a whole lot of inquiries, such as the Joint Parliamentary Committee inquiry into franchising at the moment, that covers such a breadth of different industries that are true franchises, but it also covers automotive because of that one clause in the code, and that's the only reason why.
Well, I suppose that I'm advised that the dealer agreement is 693 pages in length. That seems quite a large document.
The disclosure document?
Yes.
Sounds like a franchise to me.
No, the policies and procedures manual is, I'm told, is 693 pages in length. Do you think that is common, or there will be similar agreements across with other franchisor relationships? Because that seems a pretty detailed document in relation of the expectations that are placed upon dealers.
I don't know that it's so much about expectations as explanations. I think the idea of a disclosure document under the franchise code is exactly that. It's to ensure that all parties have got as much relevant information as they can get. To be frank with you, have not ever seen a dealership agreement because they're held confidentially, and all our members would have different agreements, and it's quite frankly nothing that they discuss with us. What we work at is the framework that sets the regulatory environment for them establishing that dealership agreement. So I don't know whether that's an excessive amount of paperwork. It probably is by most standards. Whether it is relative to other franchise businesses, I'm sorry, I've got no idea. We could take that on notice if you like, Senator.
If you could. Now, while a franchise fee is not charged, it's my understanding, speaking to dealers out on the road, is they do have to make significant investments in facilities, equipment, signage. I'm reading here, communication systems, advertising support, parts and vehicle inventories, and so forth. Do you think in some way that may constitute a franchise fee? Almost like a pay-to-play requirement?
No, well, look, I can't comment on a franchise fee because we don't deal with franchises directly, but it's certainly an investment in the business that you would need to sell motor vehicles. If you want to term that something else, then that's fine, but I don't see it as a fee. It's basically an investment to get a return.
Would you accept that there is a power imbalance between, and we're talking particularly now in relation to how General Motors Holden treated the Holden dealers in relation to the decision to retire the Holden brand. Do you believe there is a power imbalance, or would you suggest that the relationship between the manufacturers and the retailers is of equal power?
Well, I think the scenario we have here, and as I said in my opening statement, there's an enormous amount of sadness in this. But when a decision like that is made, I think that is a very unusual situation. We've never had such an iconic brand as Holden leave the market in the last 70 years. And there are numerous issues with that. Brands leave on a regular basis. That's part of having a dynamic open market. And part of that is brands leave, but the other part of it is that consumers get value for money. And studies have shown that the Australian market is one of the most competitive in the world, and that's reflected in pricing. So this is a complex issue, and the reality is the vast majority of the time, brands work very closely with their dealers because success for the dealer equates to success for the brand, and that's what you want. You want to work together. So typically it's a very harmonious relationship of working together for mutual success.
Do you think that's happened in this instance?
Well, yes, I do. Holden's been a very valuable part of the Australian automotive industry for a very long time. And that success has come through that relationship between head office and their dealer network. Now, that's over a long period of time. Clearly, that has been the case. That's where that success comes from, because both arms have to work in unison for success.
But I don't think a committee of the Senate would be looking into this matter if the Senate was of a view that the relationship was harmonious. I mean, the Senate passed a motion referring this inquiry to the Senate Education and Employment References Committee because of concerns in relation to, in terms of the terms of reference, but that imbalance of relationship, that unhappy relationship that now exists between General Motors and the Holden dealers.
So, Senator, I think you're referring to the last period of this very long relationship, and it's very understandable that dealers are very disappointed that Holden is no longer participating in the Australian market, and I'm sure there are many, many people at head office who are also extremely disappointed that Holden will no longer be participating in the Australian market. Because the people in head office have also lost their employment. So there's great sadness all round. I understand that. And I feel very sorry for all the people involved.
Mm. But I suppose this sadness that you've expressed and that General Motors also expressed sadly does not seem to have from the perspective of the dealers, turned into what they would say is a fair settlement. You know, my understanding is that the Holden dealers were quite sincere in their attempts to have a negotiation with General Motors. That they weren't after a special deal, but they were after to have a negotiation, discussion, but that notwithstanding the sadness that you're expressing and that General Motors expressed, that this sadness certainly did not evolve into a serious attempt at negotiation to resolve a settlement that could be acceptable to both sides.
Well, fundamental to that question is whether the offer made by Holden was appropriate or not, and I'm just not in a position to answer that question. But underlying that goes back to my previous point. Obviously, there's a lot of disappointment about what's happened, a lot of sadness, and then there's a question of judgment about what was appropriate, given the unique circumstances around historically one of the biggest brands leaving the market, which has never happened before.
In your submission, you also touched upon how you would, I suppose, classify dealers, and you brought up the example, I think, of Eagers, in terms of they've been purchased and they're now quite a large business. But I suppose my experience, especially in regional Queensland, is that most businesses in regional Queensland are actually what I would call family businesses. Yes, they're not what you'd call a small business. They're a medium to large business, and often they are sometimes the largest private sector employer in some of these towns. And we heard evidence before from Inverell, Italy, south of the border, who employs 32 people in Inverell. The fact that these businesses may not be a mum and dad business in a way, but they are a medium business, I don't think that should take away from that there still is this power imbalance. And I don't think we've sort of adequately got to the bottom of that yet. That yes, there might be an Eagers out on one side, but most of, if not a lot of the dealerships are generational. Evidence today that the one from Inverell first started in 1912 before, and then became part of General Motors and the Holden family from 1948. I just want to understand, is there an understanding or an acceptance that there is this imbalance and this can be prejudicial to the interests of consumers?
So, over my time in this position, I've met with a number of dealers, and typically they're very astute business people. And I've met with a number of regional dealers, which is something I've enjoyed very much, I'd have to say. And typically they have multi-franchise dealerships. They have access, as I said before, to the best legal taxation advice. They have very strong business acumen, either within the business or they can access it. So these people are sophisticated business investors who typically have run dealerships for long periods of time and done it very, very successfully. And they certainly know how to negotiate and run a business.
And that might be the case, but that possibly even shows the power balance even more, that such sophisticated, experienced business people are in a relationship with manufacturers who have so much power over them. And this comes to, I suppose, the compensation offer that was put to the dealers. Do you think that compensation offer was a fair offer, or does your organisation have a view on that offer?
So let me just go back to something else you said. The dealers, the power balance between the two is an interesting discussion, because typically these well-established dealers have control, if not ownership, of the site. The site typically is very vital. Typically, the older dealers have bigger sites, represent the historically stronger brands in the marketplace, and therefore they, in many ways, have a greater power in the relationship with my member, the OEM, because of what they control and the fact that they can, if they wish, quite often change and go with a different brand. And you see that diversification, and the fact that I think that this morning I heard that 90% plus, or 90% of Holden dealers were multi-franchise. So I think that's really absolutely essential to this debate, to understand that kind of relationship.
I don't think that's borne out by what happened to the Holden dealers in relation to why we're here at the moment.
Well,
in that General Motors came in and with 15 minutes notice to them, told them that they were retiring the Holden brand, that 185 dealers, 203 dealerships, 185 dealers across Australia were blindsided by this announcement, that where they had an expectation in terms of this relationship, they had been fulfilling their obligations, but we have a manufacturer give 15 minutes advance warning that they're retiring the brand. I think, if anything, that shows that there is a power imbalance.
Well, Senator, I would have thought in those kind of commercial relationships, you don't telegraph your moves. Last thing you want is rumours going around that brand X is about to depart the country. I would have thought in those circumstances, if you made a decision, you'd make the decision and then you'd go public with it, with your dealers, and more broadly very quickly. And that was the evidence that Holden provided this morning. So I understand that, and I would have thought that was the appropriate thing to do under the circumstances.
But I suppose it might be what General Motors thinks was an appropriate thing to do, but we're talking about, in terms of your earlier comments, about a very long-standing relationship in Australia between the manufacturer, being General Motors Holden, and the Holden dealers. That whether you say it began in 1948 or back in the 20s or 30s, an 89-year relationship is ended so abruptly, and then not just ended abruptly, but that the compensation that has been offered is seen by the Holden dealers, and this is where the bargaining power. This is where I'm coming from. I do not dispute, and I can't speak for other members of the committee, that General Motors, as a commercial entity, have the right to act in the best interest of their shareholders. That is up to General Motors. But what I am concerned about is that the power imbalance where General Motors decide to retire the Holden brand and then fail to negotiate sincerely and in good faith with the Holden dealers and that the Holden dealers effectively have no choice but to sign up to a compensation deal that has not changed after many months. And such is the fear that the dealers have. That's why very few of them have come forward to give evidence. We've got the Inverell dealer, but because they are so concerned for their future. So me looking at that, I think there is a power imbalance that leads into fear. And I just would like your response to those observations.
Okay. Well, I think working in my position, the one thing that I've learnt in this job is the worst thing that can happen is rumour floating around in things you're about to do and they're not upon the public domain. If it gets leaked, that is the worst possible outcome. And I think that would be terrible if dealers found out through the press reports that a brand was about to leave. So I think moving quickly in balance is the right thing to do. The second question is the adequacy of the offer. Now, I don't have the background material nor the expertise to make that analysis. I'm not involved in Holden or any other of my brands' relationships between the brand and their dealership network. That is a question of balance, and I heard this morning once again that PricewaterhouseCoopers have done some analysis on that from Mr. Aquilina. So it's very difficult for me to make a judgment about those things. But that goes, I would have thought, to the essence of the issue here. If that is adequate, well, then there's no issue here. As sad as it is, there is no issue.
Well, we might disagree about being adequate or not, but Senator Pratt, I might hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Senator McGrath. I've got just a few short questions. Can I ask, in terms of today's dynamic for the marketing and sale of, I just need to, I think, turn my sound down. I'm getting some feedback. What is how marketing of vehicles changing? Are importers of vehicles as reliant on dealers as they were previously?
Senator, it's quite unusual, the automotive industry, in the fact that if you look at it back, let's go back to the end of the Second World War, the dealership model has been the predominant model since that time. And there are very few products that come into the hands of the consumers in Australia that has changed so little. You also have an incredibly competitive marketplace out there. There's 68 brands reported in the VFAC sales last month. For just in a good year, we've never broken 1.2 million. That's an extraordinary number of brands in what is a relatively limited market. And that's been really good for consumers. And obviously, just like every other sector, brands will be looking for commercial advantages to get to market. And I think it's just inevitable that we will see different approaches taken. You know, whether that's in your marketing, the way in which you establish the actual getting the product to the consumer's hands, that will inevitably change, like it's changing in every other sector of the economy.
Can I ask, in that context, if it's justifiable for vehicle importers to withdraw from dealerships altogether? You know, how do you see this playing out over the long term? Clearly, brands have been able to build themselves up because of the work of dealerships, and that's been a very interdependent relationship, has it not?
Sure. So I'm not sure what your question is. Are you talking about individual dealerships or are we talking about removing the entire network, Senator?
Well, I'm talking about the changing landscape and the interdependence of vehicle manufacturers and importers with those dealerships currently. Do you think automotive importers will become less dependent on dealers over time? And what are the ramifications for how dealerships manage the capital that they've invested over a long period of time? And have been asked to do so by importers because importers are dependent on that, have historically been dependent on those dealers for marketing their product.
Well, as I said before, the market will evolve. We already have some brands, limited numbers, that don't have dealership networks but sell cars into the Australian market today. And then
Which are they?
Well, we have Genesis, for example, and Tesla that don't have the traditional dealer networks. So where the world is going to go, I don't know, Senator, but I think it's likely to change. But the dealers historically and remain to this day a great asset. And a successful brand in Australia is built upon a really successful dealer network, because the whole aim of the industry is to retain loyal buyers. So you sell a car, you then maintain the car for the life of the car, and when that consumer decides to buy another car, ideally what you want is them to come back and buy another car from that dealership or one of your other dealerships and retain it. So I don't know what the future is going to look like. I think the dealerships have an important role to play in the future going forward. And I suspect many of the brands also think that. But the world is changing and the way things go to market and the way consumers want to be treated it's changing for motor vehicles just like every other sector.
Thank you. You've implied that dealerships are not traditional franchise agreements and that they are more of a distribution network, but given the large amounts of capital that you need to expend in order to be part of that distribution network in terms of branding, floor space, the requirement to do things and purchase things in a certain way, what will be what's in it for dealers if they don't have the protection of a proper franchise agreement to prevent kinds of situations from happening?
Well, they do have the protection of a very well-established and evolving regulatory framework. It evolved on the 1st of June, just over 2 months ago. There were amendments made and we worked with the government on those amendments, and we had many discussions with the government and the other associations representing the dealers. And we take this all very seriously, but there is a role to play, and there's a balancing act, and there's a regulatory framework that needs to be appropriate, and we think it is appropriate at the moment. And
not in time. So the 2nd of June, not in time for Holden. Do you think that getting out of the market before that kicked in would have been a motivating factor for them?
I think you'd have to ask Holden that, Senator.
yeah,
Thank you. In terms of data sharing, data sharing laws compelling vehicle importers to share their data for vehicle repair, is that something that the Federation of Federal Chamber of Automotive Industries is for or against?
we've been working with the government for many years on sharing of information. The vast majority of Australians actually have their car serviced in the independent repair network rather than through dealerships. That would indicate to me that there's a lot of information in the public domain, and we know that is the fact. We're working at the government. They're looking at ways in which that they can clarify the arrangements, and we're participating in that process.
Thank you. So on that basis, how justifiable is it for Holden to, if you like, draw on that after-sales relationship for service and repair as being a significant part of the ongoing value chain that those former dealerships should bank on?
Well, my understanding, Senator, of the 5 cost centres in dealerships, one of the more profitable ones today is service and repair. So that is a very important part. And the big difference between the aftermarket and the dealer network is, one, when you take your car to the dealer network, you know that they have technicians that have been trained to actually work on your car, and they have all the tools that are not inexpensive, but all the tools required to actually maintain your vehicle.
Yes.
So that's the great advantage about taking your car to a dealer network. The other thing is you need to put a technology overlay on this. If you look at the technology in a car bought in 2020 versus one purchased in 2000, there are leaps and bounds in front in terms of the technology in that car, and that needs very well-trained technicians and very specialised tools, not the sort of stuff that you can buy off the shelf.
Thank you. So what is that? But Holden some time ago opened up its data sharing. Does a relationship with the value that it will get from that after-sales repair and servicing?
Sorry, I just missed the last part of your question, Senator.
Holden some time ago opened up data sharing. Surely that will have some impact on the return business that former dealers will get, particularly if they're no longer branded Holden. What, how will they continue really to pull that authorised repair and sales in if, when you drive past, Holden no longer extremely visible on the branding of the business?
So I haven't obviously been involved in the discussion between Holden and their dealer network who are going to continue on service and repair. I would have thought they would still brand them as Holden would be the logical answer to that question. I think the other point that you make about Holden providing information in the public domain, and I heard the evidence from the last group, the Aftermarket Association, I don't think, well, I know it is not correct. Other brands also provide information into the public domain for the aftermarket. Otherwise, I would question the AAA how their members are actually servicing this car if they haven't got the information required to service them. Clearly that information is in the public domain. As I said to you before, the vast majority of vehicles on the Australian road, and there's 17 million of them, are serviced by the independent repair network.
Yeah. Okay. So should there be a right to choose your own repairer, and should consumers be able to choose their own repairer, and who they want to see for their new car warranty and servicing rights?
So the answer to the first question is yes, they should retain. We believe you should be able to retain your right to pick your repairer, as Australians already do and always have done.
But with respect to the second part, Senator, the warranty work is appropriately directed towards the authorised dealers.
Yeah, okay. I'd like to thank you both very much for giving evidence this afternoon. very long day, and everyone's borne with us very well by gathering both in person and over video conference. I want to thank you very much for your contribution to the hearing today. My senatorial colleagues for the way we've worked together today to this very important issue to a great many Australians.
Thanks, Senator.
Thanks, Senator.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator